My name is Clara Whitfield. I am 36 years old, and last Christmas I learned what it meant to be erased by your own blood. My sister shoved me in front of a room full of relatives. My parents laughed, and they told me I was not welcome in the very house I had kept alive with $99,000 of my own money. What they never knew was that my grandmother left me 20% of the family company, and I had the signed will to prove it. That night, humiliation turned into resolve, and the decision I made would strip them of their home, their fortune, and the perfect image they built while standing on my shoulders. Snow clung to the hood of my car as I pulled into my parents' driveway in Denver on Christmas Eve. The roofline blinked with red and green lights, the kind of lights I used to hang with my dad before he handed the job to Melissa's friends. Music drifted from the house, muffled laughter spilling out through the cracks of frosted windows. For a second, my chest tightened with the memory of holidays that used to mean something. I shook the thought away and grabbed the wrapped gift from the passenger seat. The front door opened before I even touched the handle. Warm air and the smell of cinnamon spilled into the night. My sister Melissa stood in the entryway in a crimson dress, a perfect smile fixed on her face as she hugged a couple from next door. When her eyes landed on me, the smile faltered just enough for me to notice, then she turned her back and laughed too loudly at something the neighbors said. I stepped inside, snow melting onto the hardwood floor. My coat felt heavy on my shoulders, but no one moved to take it. The living room sparkled with tinsel and glowing ornaments. Cousins and old family friends filled the couches. My mother Evelyn balanced a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her pearls catching the light. She glanced at me, eyes cool, and walked on as though I were just another guest who had wandered in. My father Thomas stood near the fireplace, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his booming laugh filling the room as he clapped a colleague on the back. Not once did he look in my direction. I set the gift under the tree, the paper damp from the snow, and scanned the tables for a place card with my name. The dining room was filled, the long table set with crystal glasses and polished silver. Every chair was taken. I saw cousins who barely visited seated comfortably, friends of Melissa chatting like they belonged more than I did. My name was nowhere. I walked toward the table anyway. Conversations dipped as I passed. Melissa caught sight of me approaching and stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wood floor. She planted herself in my path, her smile tight, her hand pressing hard against my shoulder. I staggered back, catching myself on the back of a chair. The room went quiet, forks hovering midair. "The door is over there," she said, her voice syrupy, sweet but sharp enough to cut. "You don't belong here tonight." Heat shot up my neck. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, my father finally turned. His gaze pinned me in place like I was an intruder. He lifted his glass, let out a short laugh, and said, "We all agreed. You are not welcome at Christmas this year." My mother's voice followed, smooth and cold. "That is right, Clara. This gathering is not for you." A ripple of laughter moved down the table, nervous and forced. Some cousins shifted in their chairs, eyes dropping to their plates. Others smirked into their wine glasses. I caught Jenna, my younger cousin, tilting her phone ever so slightly toward me, her lips pressed into a thin line. The sting of humiliation burned deeper than the shove. My knees trembled, my palms damp as I steadied myself against the chair. Melissa's eyes gleamed with triumph. The music from the stereo carried on, cheerful and cruelly out of place. I straightened my coat, brushing off the spot where her hand had pushed me. The tree lights blurred gold and green, bleeding together. My mother passed behind me, offering the cheese plate to a guest, as though I no longer stood there. My father turned his back, already laughing with his friend again. No one came to my defense. No one asked if I was all right. The silence of complicity cut sharper than any words. I turned slowly, each step toward the door echoing against the hardwood. Behind me, the room filled again with chatter, the moment erased as quickly as it had landed. I felt Jenna's eyes on me, but she said nothing. The cold hit me like a wall when I opened the door. Snowflakes stung my cheeks, clung to my lashes. The music dimmed as the door closed, leaving only the sound of wind rushing through the dark. I stood on the porch, breath clouding in the night air, staring at the glowing house that no longer felt like mine. For a long moment I did not move. The sting in my chest shifted into something heavier, colder. My hands clenched into fists inside my pockets. The humiliation replayed in my head, each laugh, each averted gaze, each word from my parents echoing like a verdict. I looked toward my car, snow piling on the windshield, and my jaw tightened. Whatever thread had tethered me to this family had just snapped. And in that sharp silence, one thought cut through clearer than the rest. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I remembered the first time I wrote a check for my parents' mortgage. It was spring of 2019, the year after Grandma Margaret passed, and my father had called me late one night. His voice was steady, but I could hear the hesitation when he said the bank was pressing for payment. I had just finished my shift at the accounting firm, exhaustion heavy in my bones. But without thinking twice, I opened my laptop and transferred the money. One payment turned into two, then months stretched into years. By December of 2024, I had poured nearly $99,000 into that house money I could have used for my own home, my own future. At first, I told myself it was love. Every time I clicked send on another payment, I repeated the same words in my head. This keeps the family together. This keeps the roof from caving in. But with each bill, my chest felt a little hollower, like I was handing away pieces of myself for a promise no one intended to keep. The utility bills came next. I kept the lights on in that house, the water hot, the internet running, so Melissa could post her perfect holiday pictures online. I would be sitting in my small Denver apartment with secondhand furniture and a drafty window, while across town, my parents' home glowed with warmth I had paid for. They would host parties, invite neighbors, serve wine, and I would smile at my empty fridge thinking at least they were comfortable. One Christmas, I bought a gift I could barely afford. It was 2021, and I had received a modest bonus at work. I withdrew $5,000 in crisp bills, placed them in an envelope, and wrapped it with gold ribbon. I handed it to my mother with a small smile, saying I wanted them to feel secure through the winter. Melissa swooped in before she even opened it, her voice bright as she announced, "Look what we gave you, it is from all of us." I stood there stunned, the ribbon still warm from my hands, and everyone clapped at her generosity. I laughed quietly to myself that night as I scraped ice off my car alone in the driveway, the echo of her words ringing in my ears. Year after year I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and lived frugally. I drove the same car I bought at 25, its heater sputtering in the Colorado cold, while Melissa flashed new wheels on social media. She wore dresses I knew she had charged to cards I eventually helped pay off. My parents never asked how I was managing. They simply assumed the money would arrive, and I kept providing like a ghost tethered to the house, but never invited inside. The strangest part was the silence. They never thanked me, not even once. Instead, there was this unspoken expectation, as if sacrifice was my role, and they were merely collecting what was owed. My coworkers celebrated when they bought condos or planned trips to Europe. I nodded politely, hiding the truth that my savings drained each month into a place where I was not welcome. I told myself for a long time that maybe if I gave enough, they would finally see me. Maybe my father would look at me with pride the way he looked at Melissa when she walked into a room. Maybe my mother would introduce me as her steady, dependable daughter instead of brushing past my name. Maybe Melissa would thank me for covering her share when she lost her job. But none of that ever came. By 2023, I had grown tired. I remember sitting at my desk late one evening, spreadsheets glowing on the screen, my phone buzzing with another notice from the utility company tied to my parents' address. I clicked the payment button with a hollow laugh. $90 to keep their internet running while I ate ramen for the third night in a row. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles, wondering if they even knew the password to the account, or if they just assumed bills magically disappeared. The night of Melissa's 30th birthday still stung. She threw a lavish party at a downtown restaurant. I had contributed half the deposit for the venue because she insisted the reservation was in danger. When the cake arrived, she raised her glass and thanked her friends for making her dreams possible. She did not mention me. My parents clapped proudly. I slipped out before dessert, walking alone to my car while the sound of their laughter carried into the street. Every sacrifice blurred together, each one carving deeper lines inside me. I felt like a shadow in my own story, present enough to keep things upright, but invisible when it mattered. I wanted to scream at them sometimes to ask if they realized what I had given up, but the words stayed locked in my chest. That night on the porch after Melissa pushed me in front of everyone, the memories of every check, every transfer, every envelope of cash collided all at once. The truth pressed down heavy. My giving had never been about family, not really. It had become a leash they pulled tighter every year. I took a slow breath, the cold air burning my lungs. For the first time, I understood that my sacrifice had not made me indispensable. It had made me disposable. The more I gave, the easier it became for them to erase me. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked to my car. My fingers fumbled for the keys, but my mind was already moving elsewhere. I had carried them for too long. They believed I would never let go. They were wrong. As I started the engine, and the heater coughed to life, I stared at the windshield wipers, clearing thick layers of snow. My reflection in the glass looked different, sharper, almost unfamiliar. I whispered to myself words that felt both terrifying and liberating. They will finally see what happens when I stop carrying the weight. And with that thought, another image flashed in my mind. Not of the past, but of the file I had kept hidden for years. A file that held the power they never imagined I would use. The file could wait. Inside the house, the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter reminded me that the dinner was far from over. Against my better judgment, I walked back through the front door, the warmth and smell of roasted lamb wrapping around me like a taunt. No one looked up. My coat still clung to my shoulders as I scanned the dining room. A small card with my name was nowhere to be found. Instead, a hostess chair had been pulled near the side door, half in the draft of the hallway, where the cold air leaked through every time someone went outside. That was my place. I slid into the chair, feeling the chill seep through the wood into my back. The table stretched long and glowing under chandeliers, cousins and neighbors arranged in neat rows, wine glasses, filled plates gleaming. I sat alone at the edge, close enough to smell the food, but far enough to feel forgotten. Melissa rose, her crimson dress catching the light, and lifted her champagne flute. Her voice carried above the murmur. "To our family," she said, "the perfect family, the kind of family people dream of." Her eyes skimmed the table, touching every face except mine. A wave of laughter and applause followed, forks tapping against glasses. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the napkin in my lap. For a moment I thought about standing about telling them the truth of who had kept this house warm all these years. But my throat closed. My father leaned back in his chair, his arm around my mother, both of them glowing under the toast. They smiled as if they had built this harmony, as if I did not exist 2 feet away. I felt the draft each time the kitchen doors swung open. Servers bustled past, carrying platters, brushing close to me as if I were one of them. Across the table, my cousin Jenna lifted her phone, pretending to scroll, but the camera lens caught me squarely. She held it steady, her lips pressed into a firm line, her eyes flicking toward Melissa, then back at me. The next course was served. Laughter rose, stories flowed, but no one spoke to me. My plate came late, a sliver of meat cold at the edges, bread stiff and dry. Melissa leaned toward the guest beside her, her voice pitched just high enough to carry. Some people just never understand when they are no longer part of the picture. Heads turned briefly, eyes sliding past me, no one brave enough to answer. My stomach knotted, heat burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let a tear fall. I straightened my back and folded my hands in my lap. I wanted them to see composure, not defeat. The humiliation pressed heavier with each laugh, each toast, each moment of silence that confirmed my absence. My parents never glanced my way. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, but kept smiling. Even the guests who barely knew me chose indifference over acknowledgement. I sat still in that drafty chair, invisible in plain sight. When Melissa stood again to thank everyone for making the evening perfect, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against the floor broke through the chatter. For a brief second, every face turned to me. Forks froze, glasses lowered. The weight of their eyes landed heavy. I did not shout. I did not argue. I did not cry. I placed my napkin on the table, smoothed the front of my coat, and stepped away. The silence stretched, no one daring to move. Melissa's lips curled into the smallest smile, as if my quiet exit confirmed everything she wanted. I caught Jenna's gaze one last time. She held her phone steady, eyes shining her thumb, pausing as if she knew she had captured what mattered. I walked past her without a word through the crowded room, each step measured and slow. The cold air hit me again as I opened the door. Behind me, the noise resumed, laughter rising louder, trying to cover the fracture my presence had made. I stood on the porch, my breath sharp in the night air, knowing every second had been recorded, every sneer and every silence caught on Jenna's lens. And as I stared out at the snow falling against the dark street, I realized humiliation had given me something I had not expected. Proof. And proof in the right hands could become the weapon they never saw coming. Snow coated my hair as I crossed the porch and stepped into the driveway. The cold sliced through my coat, each breath turning to mist. My car sat under a blanket of white, the windshield glazed with ice. I pulled the door open, slid inside, and slammed it shut behind me. The silence was thick, the heater sputtering when I turned the key. I could still hear the faint hum of laughter from the house, muffled by the snow and walls. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, then released it slowly. My bag rested on the passenger seat, heavier than usual, not because of weight, but because of what was inside. I unzipped it and pulled out the leather folder I had kept hidden for years. The edges of old papers brushed against my fingertips, each one a reminder that Margaret, my grandmother, had not forgotten me the way everyone else had. She had left me 20% of Monroe Lumber, the family's pride, the company that bore another man's name but was built with her inheritance. My parents had tried to tuck the will away, acting as though Melissa was the natural heir to everything. They had never expected me to keep the original copy Margaret had given me months before she passed. I could still remember her hands trembling as she pressed it into mine, whispering that I had earned every piece of it, because I was the one who showed up when no one else did. I pulled my laptop from the bag, the screen lighting up the dark interior of the car. The glow felt almost defiant against the frozen night. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about every bill I had paid, every envelope of cash, every moment they laughed while I sat alone. The humiliation of tonight pressed against my ribs like a blade. They thought they had erased me. They had no idea I was still holding the final string. I opened my email and typed Robert Hayes into the search bar. His name popped up instantly. Robert had been a friend from college, someone who understood numbers and law with a precision I admired. He had become a civil attorney in Denver, and though we had not spoken often in recent years, he had always told me to keep the documents safe. The cursor blinked in the empty message box. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. I typed slowly, each word heavy. Robert, initiate liquidation of all assets tied to my 20% share. Effective immediately. Do not delay. For a moment I stared at the words. My reflection flickered in the dark glass of the screen, pale and sharp. I thought of Melissa's smug smile, my father's cold laugh, my mother's pearls catching the light as she ignored me. The rage in my chest steadied into something clearer than anger. Resolve. I hit send. The whoosh of the message leaving my outbox was soft, but it thundered in my ears. My breath came quicker, frost fogging the inside of the windshield. The file was no longer just a weight in my bag. It was in motion, a force they could not stop. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the seat creaking under me. My pulse slowed, the heater finally beginning to blow warm air. Outside, snow drifted lazily across the hood, muffling the world in white. I let my eyes close for a second, feeling the exhaustion of years pressing down. But beneath the exhaustion was a current of power, faint but undeniable. I opened my eyes again and gripped the steering wheel. The porch lights glowed through the curtain of snow silhouettes moving inside the house as if nothing had happened. I imagined the moment they would discover what I had done, the shock when they realized the person they had cast out still controlled a piece of their empire. The cold no longer stung as sharply. For the first time in years, I felt the scales shift. The silence in the car was no longer empty. It was waiting. And as I pulled the folder back into my bag, one thought rose above the rest. Robert would not be the only one hearing from me. There were other accounts, other strings tied neatly to my name, and I intended to cut every single one. My phone buzzed before I could even put the car in drive. The screen lit up with Robert Hayes' name, and for a moment I just stared at it. It had been months since we last exchanged more than a holiday greeting, yet he answered my midnight email as if he had been waiting for it. I slid my finger across the screen and lifted it to my ear. Clara. His voice was steady calm, the same voice that had guided me through college exams years ago. I read your message. Do you still have the original will? I reached across the seat for the leather folder, my fingers brushing the familiar creases of paper that had traveled with me through apartments and office moves. Yes, I said, my voice low but firm. I have everything. Grandma gave me her signed copy herself. That changes everything, Robert replied. If you are holding that document, and if it was notarized the way she always did her paperwork, then the shares are legally yours. Your parents cannot erase you from it no matter what story they have told. I let out a breath I had been holding for years. The words settled into me like heat spreading through cold limbs. They cannot stop it. No, he said without hesitation. 20% is 20%. With that share, you can initiate liquidation block, new deals, even force an audit if you wish. Clara, you hold leverage they never imagined you would use. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, the sound of wind rattling faintly against the car. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that the balance had shifted. I had been silent so long that I had almost forgotten my voice mattered. Robert continued already in his rhythm. I will draft the filing tonight. At dawn, I will deliver it to the clerk's office downtown. By law, the process begins immediately, and your family will receive notice before the end of the week. I pictured Melissa reading the letter, my father pacing the kitchen, my mother clutching her pearls. A current of satisfaction ran through me. For once, I would not be the one scrambling to make payments in the dark. Robert's tone softened. You should know this will not be quiet. They will fight. They may call you. They may even show up at your door. Are you ready for that? I lifted my head, watching snowflakes slide down the windshield in crooked paths. They already erased me tonight, I whispered. They made their choice. Now they will live with mine. There was silence on the other end, then a firm reply. Tomorrow morning it is. No one can undo it once it is filed. The call ended, but the words stayed in the air, vibrating inside me. I closed the folder and slid it back into my bag, my fingers lingering on the zipper. For years I had carried proof, without realizing it was a weapon. Now the weapon was loaded, and Robert had just pulled back the safety. I sat still in the car for a long time, the heater humming, my mind tracing every path this could take. The image of Jenna holding her phone at dinner flashed across my thoughts. She had captured the humiliation, the laughter, the silence. That video, paired with the papers in my bag, formed a story no one could rewrite. The porch light flickered through the curtain of snow shadows still moving inside the house. I no longer cared what they toasted or who they smiled at. The balance sheet of our family had finally tilted, and for the first time, it tilted toward me. When I finally put the car in reverse and eased out of the driveway, the decision was sealed. Robert would be at the courthouse in the morning. The law was on my side, and the first domino was about to fall. And as the streetlights blurred past on my way back into the city, I knew the world outside that courtroom would soon know too. By the time the holiday lights dimmed and the last strands of garland sagged on porches around Denver, the storm had already started online. Jenna's video appeared first in a neighborhood Facebook group, a short clip of Melissa's hand shoving me and my parents laughing as if it were a rehearsed performance. Within hours, comments piled up, neighbors tagging each other, voices rising in disgust. By morning, the clip had been shared across the city, strangers adding their own outrage. I sat at my kitchen table scrolling through hundreds of comments, the glow of my laptop bathing the room in blue light. People I had never met wrote that they could not believe a family would humiliate their own daughter on Christmas Eve. Others said Melissa's smirk made their blood boil. A retired teacher from Denver posted that she hoped the sister who was pushed would take everything back. I realized she was talking about me. My phone buzzed nonstop messages from coworkers and distant acquaintances. Some asked if I was all right. Others sent links astonished to recognize my face in a viral clip. One text from an old classmate read, "Clara, I always knew you carried more than they gave you credit for. Now the whole city knows." On the second day, the video spread beyond Denver. Local bloggers reposted it, attaching headlines about holiday cruelty. Twitter filled with hashtags, people debating family loyalty and betrayal. Every share drove the humiliation deeper into Melissa's skin and lifted me further from the shadows. For years I had been invisible. Now invisibility was impossible. I poured coffee and turned on the television, only to see the clip playing on the evening news. The anchor's voice carried a mix of disbelief and pity as she narrated what viewers were already dissecting online. They did not use my last name, but anyone who knew us could see the truth. My parents' laughter. Melissa's shove my quiet exit into the snow. It was all there. On the third day, the knock came. I opened the door to see a woman bundled in a wool coat microphone clipped to her scarf. Behind her, a cameraman adjusted his lens. She introduced herself as Vanessa Lopez, a reporter for Denver Daily. Her tone was cautious, respectful, almost apologetic. "Clara, would you be willing to speak on the record about what happened at your parents' house?" I hesitated, gripping the doorframe, the winter air swirling around us. I thought about the file Robert had already moved through the courthouse. I thought about the voices online demanding justice for someone they had never met. Then I stepped aside and invited her in. We sat in my living room, the walls bare except for a small bookshelf. Vanessa asked gentle questions, her eyes steady. "Did you feel threatened that night? Did you know your cousin was recording? What do you want people to understand about what happened?" I spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. I told her I had supported my family for years quietly, without recognition. I admitted the shove hurt less than the laughter, less than the way no one at that table spoke up. I said the video captured what I had lived in silence for far too long. Her cameraman filmed as I spoke, the lens focused on my face. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice did not waver. I wanted them to see composure, to know that humiliation had not broken me. When Vanessa stood to leave, she touched my arm. "The city will hear you now," she said softly. I nodded, closing the door behind her, the words echoing in the quiet apartment. By evening, the interview aired. My phone erupted again, friends and strangers sending screenshots of my face on the news. The caption beneath me read, "Local woman speaks after viral Christmas video." The clip of Melissa shoving me played side by side with my calm explanation. The contrast was undeniable. For the first time, I felt the tide turning in public, not just in private. The Whitfields were no longer the admired family on the hill, with twinkling lights and perfect parties. They were the family who laughed as they erased their own daughter. I sat in the dark, watching the snow drift past my window, the city alive with my story. My parents had always counted on silence. Now silence was impossible. And soon, when the letters from the courthouse landed on their doorstep, humiliation would not be the only storm they faced. The email from Robert arrived just after dawn. I rubbed sleep from my eyes and pulled the laptop onto my lap, the glow of the screen casting pale light across the bedroom. His message was brief, clipped, but every word carried weight. Liquidation complete. Funds released. Monroe Lumber notified. Estimated value of your share, $350,000. I read it twice, my heart pounding against my ribs. The number felt surreal, like a lifeline thrown into waters I had been drowning in for years. Attached were copies of the filings, signed and stamped, proof that what had been whispered and hidden was now carved into law. My 20% was no longer paper gathering dust. It was cash wired into my account. By midday, the ripple had already begun. My parents' house, the one I had paid for month after month, slipped into default the moment I stopped covering the mortgage. The bank wasted no time. Notices were tacked to the front door, red letters screaming what they had always pretended could never happen. Their beautiful facade was crumbling. That afternoon, a neighbor sent me a photo of a tow truck dragging my father's black SUV out of the driveway. The caption read simply, "Thought you should see this." I stared at the image, my father's prized possession tilted on metal hooks, and I felt nothing but a hollow relief. Voicemails piled up on my phone. My mother's voice sharp at first, then pleading, "Clara, please, we can fix this, call me back." My father's tone cracked, a man unused to begging. "Clara, you are making a mistake, come home and talk." Melissa left the most messages, her sobs choking each sentence. "You cannot do this to us. I need you. Please, please pick up." I set the phone face down on the counter and walked away. Their voices no longer held the power they once did. Every ring was a reminder that for the first time in my life, I was not the one scrambling to clean up their mess. Lucas found me sitting on the couch that evening, the television on mute, light flickering across the walls. He lowered himself beside me, his hand brushing mine. I watched his profile, the quiet concern etched there. He waited before speaking. "Do you ever worry," he asked softly, "that in doing this, you might be turning into them?" I blinked, surprised by the question. My first instinct was anger, but then I saw the worry in his eyes. I turned fully toward him, my voice calm but steady. "No, Lucas. They took and took until there was nothing left of me. This is not cruelty. This is balance. I am only reclaiming what was already mine. I will never laugh while pushing someone to the ground. I will never erase someone who sacrificed for me." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. His fingers intertwined with mine, warm against the chill in my skin. I leaned back, the weight of the day settling, but not crushing. Outside, snow began to fall again, flakes tapping against the window. My phone buzzed one more time, lighting up the counter with Melissa's name. I did not move. The glow faded, leaving the room quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater. I thought of the courthouse letters, the foreclosure notices, the tow truck, the voicemails. Each piece was a domino tipping into the next. Revenge was no longer a thought or a plan. It was alive, unfolding in real time. And yet beneath the calm, I felt something else stirring, a question I had not dared ask. If this was only the beginning, what would happen when the final domino fell? The new year crept in quietly, the streets of Denver blanketed in fresh snow that muffled every sound. I walked with my coat wrapped tight, the cold air sharp in my lungs, the city still decorated with tired holiday lights. In my bag, I carried the folder Robert had prepared, stamped with signatures and seals that no one could erase. Each page was a piece of the truth I had carried in silence for years, now weaponized and undeniable. I stopped at the corner of Colfax Avenue, watching the traffic lights shift from red to green. Cars passed with headlights glowing against the white streets. Somewhere across town, I knew my parents were pacing in a half-dark house, foreclosure notices taped to the door, phones ringing without answer. Melissa would be in her room, staring at her shattered reflection online, the perfect image she built, now crumbling with every share of Jenna's video. I thought about the voices that had filled my voicemail. Pleading, angry, desperate. I had listened to none of them. I did not need to. Their words had been the same all my life, cloaked in control and entitlement. Only now the tone had changed, twisted by fear. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I kept walking past shuttered shops and glowing street lamps. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if every block between me and that house peeled another layer of weight off my shoulders. I had not destroyed anything. I had simply stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. I heard Lucas's voice in my mind, his question lingering like a shadow. Was I becoming like them? My answer had been steady, but now under the glow of the winter sky, it felt even truer. No, I had not turned cruel. I had not laughed at someone else's fall. I had reclaimed what was mine, nothing more. At the steps of the courthouse downtown, I paused. The building loomed, its stone walls, catching the pale light of early morning. I imagined my grandmother walking these steps, once making sure her will was sealed with legality, her name signed with intent. She had known what might happen. She had known who would be erased and who would fight to exist. She had chosen me. I pulled the folder tighter against my chest. Inside were receipts, deeds, the will, every thread of evidence that tied my years of sacrifice to something real. I whispered to the quiet street. I did nothing but take back what was already mine. The words rose like steam in the cold air, steady and final. The city was waking. Lights flickered in office windows. Buses rumbled past, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted from a corner cafe. Life carried on. But inside me, something had settled, a line drawn in the snow that could never be crossed again. I turned and began to walk back toward my apartment, the sound of my boots keeping rhythm with my heartbeat. For the first time, I was not thinking about bills or who needed saving. I was thinking about myself, about the year ahead, untouched, unwritten mine to claim. Behind me, the courthouse doors stayed shut, but their weight was no longer on my shoulders. Ahead, the street stretched open, snow falling softer now, as if even the storm had tired. I carried the folder not as a burden, but as proof of survival. Proof that when family chose to erase me, I had chosen not to disappear. And as the wind rose again, I tightened my scarf and whispered to myself the truth I had waited a lifetime to say. When they took everything I gave, I learned I had the right to take it back. And with that truth settled in my bones, I knew my story with them was over, but mine was only beginning.